It Takes a Village. Written by Melody Grace. Featuring Melody Grace.
My daughter was the best thing that ever happened to my wife and I. When her bright blue eyes opened for the first time and locked onto mine, my whole world stopped for a split second and changed its orbit to go around her. Truly a breathtaking moment. As the years went by, I felt nothing but joy watching her grow into her own little person. She was as sweet as honey and as bold as sriracha. No milestone ever seemed to faze her throughout the years, as she met them all with the grace and wisdom well beyond her youth. So imagine our disbelief when a policeman showed up at our doorstep holding her hot pink helmet in his shaking hands. Not our daughter, I thought. She would never ride her bike out onto a busy street. She knew better. My wife's blood-curdling screams filled my ears as she sank to the floor in despair. I couldn't stop staring at the officer through tunnel vision as he tried to give us his condolences. The sirens echoing in the background confirmed his tragic story. I nodded briefly, ears ringing, as I laid my hand on my wife's shoulder. The officer gestured to the back of his police car for me to accompany him and identify the body. My legs seemed to follow, but my mind was hazy as I shuffled behind him. My wife didn't move. When we got to the hospital, the sight before me was gruesome, and that's when I finally lost it. My little girl, my whole world, gone in an instant. I couldn't breathe as I watched them zip her little body into a bag. I wanted to die. Maybe I already had. This had to be what hell was, right? When I got back to our home, my wife was curled up on the sofa, tears still streaming down her cheeks in a constant river of grief. I reached out to hold her and was abruptly shot down. I understood, though. No amount of comfort would ever heal the open wound we both now shared. Hours turned into days, and before we knew it, it was time to attend our only daughter's funeral. During the time lapse, my wife had escaped into her head and locked the door behind her. Sleep evaded her the whole week as she searched the internet for what I assumed to be grief counseling advice. I silently prayed in the background, hoping she would find the answers she so desperately needed. When we arrived at the church, I noticed the whole town had come to offer their condolences. I squeezed my wife's hand in support as we walked towards the door, but I received no return encouragement. During the ceremony, as tears were in abundance, I glanced over at my wife and noticed she was almost smiling. I figured she was getting some much-needed closure and hopefully feeling a little at peace that our daughter was somewhere special and happy. When the service was over, we all climbed into our cars and drove in a parade line to the cemetery. This seemed to make my wife even happier. As we parked, she quickly jumped out of the car and grabbed some pastries she had spent all night making. My daughter's favorite, raspberry cheesecake bars. I watched as she practically ran to the gravesite to pass them out to each person with a bright, inviting smile. Her eyes seemed to water as they each took a bite, returning her smile with one of comfort. I had turned to reach for our coats out of the back seat when the screaming started. I quickly shot around and watched in horror as each of them fell to the ground around my wife, foam spewing from their mouths as they twitched fervently. My wife's smile grew 3 sizes as she clapped her hands like a maniac. I tossed the coats and ran to her, shouting for help as my body shook in terror. I was sure my wife would be dropping any minute along with the rest, but she just stood there, smiling stupidly at our daughter's coffin. I reached to pull her out of her apparent shock when a loud cracking sound averted my attention. My heart stopped when a small hand shot out of the wooden tomb my darling daughter was laid to rest in. I turned to my wife in utter disbelief as she whispered in my ear 8 words that I will never forget.